Thank you very much for coming today to hear about fake news, something very much of the moment and of the zeitgeist, as it were. And we've got a great panel here with us, and what we're going to do, we're going to have a bit of a collection of thoughts from our speakers. Then we'll have a few questions up here, and then we're going to throw the floor open to yourselves. So hopefully you'll be asking some good questions as well. To begin with introductions, I'm Sean Coughlin, and I work for the BBC as a journalist. So fake news is something close to my heart. We have another journalist here as well, actually, Kate Russell, who also specialises in technology and appears on BBC programmes as well. So another person with very strong connections to the whole issue about the news and false news. Going along this way, we have one of our top 10 finalists from this year's Teacher Prize, Marjorie Brown. So if there's some sort of spectrum of trust, journalists like myself are probably at one end, and we have excellent teachers like Marjorie at the other. And also we have another great teacher and educator and founder of things here, Rebecca Cramer, who's co-founder of a school and a group of schools in London called the Reach Academy. It's been very widely praised. And so schools are also at the forefront of thinking about what fake news is, how do we arm the next generation with enough understanding to cope with it. And the more observant amongst you might have guessed that another panellist is involved in social media. Srenivasan, which I keep, Srenivasan, to get it right, is here, who is a strategist for the Teacher Prize and a king of social media. And social media is at the very heart of all these debates about fake news, I think. It's one of the key components in this whole discussion. All of you will have heard of fake news, which shows how quickly the concept has spread and also how it sort of touches such a raw nerve. But also it made me think about it. You know, what is it? How do we know that it isn't fake? Information and misinformation have been around forever. Propaganda isn't new. There's always been propaganda. And in a way, when we think about spin doctors, that's really a sort of form of misrepresentation sometimes, shaping news to our own convenience. Is the difference now maybe that the technology has changed and that ideas can spread more quickly, and also everyone's their own spin doctor, everybody is part of this very politicised media debate? Is it to do with the fact that the traditional media is receding? People don't read newspapers in the way they might once have done. People don't necessarily watch TV bulletins. People get their news from social media. And so the fragmentation of news possibly is a very big component in this. The old gatekeepers have gone and we haven't got new ones. Who controls news? I think also there's another question about whether it is actually something much more fundamental. I think we're in a time of very polarised politics. People have been pushed to extremes, and the old mainstream rather looks quite fragile sometimes. And in a way, fake news is part of that. Fake news, in some ways, is just the news that people want to hear about themselves. It's the end of the idea that there's something in the middle we can agree upon. And I think it raises all sorts of huge questions about democratic exchanges if you can't agree the common basics about what is reliable evidence. How can you have an election if what's on offer on the table is possibly entirely made up? I think that really casts very, very long shadows. And we're here at a big education conference, and so the next question is, what do we do about it? How do we teach children to distinguish between false news, authentic news, contested news, and all the things around it? It's become probably more important than ever before. But it's no easier, I think. It's a very, very tough one. And we've got some great speakers here. So if we get them started, and then you think about some ideas yourself, and we'll try and get people involved, because it is very much a conversation, because fake news is in the eye of the beholder. Everyone thinks it's something else. Everyone thinks what they're saying is true. And fake news is someone else's view. So should we start from that end? Should we start with Marjorie? If you give us your thoughts. Do you want to stand up? It breaks up a bit, doesn't it? If we
Good afternoon. As a history teacher, I think that we do need critical literacy, and we need critical thinking in our classrooms. And Simon Sharma touched on that this morning when he said that history breathes the oxygen of argument and dissent. And I think encouraging debate in the classroom around any source is really important, that nothing is taken at face value. So one of the things that we do in history is we use fake news as an educational tool to get children to analyze sources and not take anything at face value. One of the examples I use is the massacre of the miners in Marikana, and how, because for children, a photograph is a very powerful thing. They are told that a photograph is worth 1,000 words, and it's there, it's authentic. But there's a journalist, Greg Marinovich, and he was at Marikana when the miners were protesting. He took photos immediately after the police fired on them, and an hour later, the police photographers took photos. And in the inquest afterwards, Greg Marinovich's photos showed the miners unarmed. The police photographs showed the miners armed. And the difference in that 1 hour was weapons were planted. So a photograph versus a photograph. And it becomes an important example of how you just have to interrogate everything you see, everything you read. So what we do is I teach the children that any text without a context is a con. And so we really do interrogate what is the context in which this photograph was taken or this speech was written. What is the origin of the source? What is the purpose of the person producing that? What is the limitation in terms of content? Does it look like a staged photograph? Does it look as though it was just captured in the moment? What emotive words are there? And I think it's to build up those critical thinkers to constantly interrogate what they see in the world. Now, that's fine when you can read, and you read in a source, but in our continent, 76% of youth rely on social media for news, 82% of youth in Latin America, 86% of youth in the Middle East rely on social media, compared to 71% of youth in the US and 65% of youth in Europe. And I think the power of social media is incredibly, I don't know, it's one of those, we're not going to be able to fight it. But at the same time, we need to embrace it then and bring it into the classrooms and interrogate it so that youth can continue to use what they think is a really cool tool, but with interrogation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's Rebecca next.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're missing a bit of a trick here, and I'm going to tell you two stories to try to illustrate that. Can I just get a show of hands? How many people here are from the UK? Okay, a couple. Okay, so about 2 weeks ago in the UK, something really exciting happened that only happens about once every 3 years. And it's an incredibly exciting day for teachers, and they jump for joy. And they say things like, I'm going to get all my marking done, or I'm going to do all of my planning for the next 2 weeks. And actually what they do is just sit in their pajamas and watch Netflix all day. And does anyone know what I'm talking about? What happened? Snow. We had a snow day, which in London means that we had approximately this much snow, and everyone panics. And all of the schools close. But the teachers get a day in bed in their pajamas watching Netflix, so that's good. And the way that we communicate that to parents is by text message and by email. And then after we've done those things, we normally update our website. And we put on the website that the school is closed so that if anyone needs to find out that information, they can. And there are some schools that were unlucky and were in central parts of London or in areas of the country that didn't get a snow day. And particularly in one area of London where some friends that I have work, some of their sixth formers mocked up a copy of their school website with "we are shut tomorrow, we have a snow day," and then WhatsApped that screenshot of the fake website to their parents. And their parents sent that via WhatsApp to their parent friends. And so eventually the whole school community of parents believed that the school was shut the next day for a snow day, which it wasn't. And what was fascinating about this, and it happened at a good time because I was thinking about this conference, was that the pupils knew that that website mock-up was fake. And they knew that because they got the WhatsApp message and they went onto the school website and they saw that it wasn't real. And that was instinctive for them. They simply got some information and then checked it. And they also thought the school wouldn't communicate it like that. The school would have texted my parents or emailed my parents. The parents didn't question it. The parents took it at face value and assumed that the school would use the internet to communicate information that was important. So that's the first story. The second story is slightly less fun. So this week in my school, we had a boy who, he's 13 years old, and unfortunately he engaged with some inappropriate activity on the internet, and he live streamed himself doing something pornographic. We've had to take action as a school, and obviously that's something that happens in schools when you're working in communities that are challenging like we do. And I'd just like to stop at this point and say that our school results are very good. Academically, the children do very, very well. And yet this boy is still engaging with social media in this way. And we had a meeting with his parents, which was very challenging, and it's always a really difficult conversation when you have to talk about those kinds of things. And at the end of the meeting, his mother turned to me and said, "Can I give him his phone back this evening?" And I looked at her in utter disbelief and said, "I don't think he should have his phone back until he's at least 35 years old. This is not a good thing." And his phone is now in the safe in my school. But the point of both of those stories is that the parents were woefully ill-equipped to manage what was coming to them via the internet. And the trick that I think we're missing is that there's a lot of talk about educating children, and actually we need to be educating their parents as well, because their parents are the ones, and their teachers are the ones who are trying to provide this education, but we didn't grow up in the world that they're growing up in, and we don't navigate the world in the way that they do. And so I think we need to be educating teachers and adults much better. The National Literacy Trust in 2017 published a paper on fake news, and they said that the children lack the critical literacy skills, but I think the adults do as well. And we teach in our school, and as Sean said earlier, propaganda is not a new thing. It's been around forever on varying degrees and on a spectrum, but it's always existed, and we teach our children about propaganda. What we fail to do, I think, successfully is make links and draw parallels between propaganda that used to be the town crier or people spreading rumours and what is happening on social media today. And we fail to draw those links for our children so that they can see that we are living in a world where potentially social media could be the start of the next World War if propaganda was used in that way. And we've seen it with political campaigns. We've seen incredible things happen with the power of social media over the last few years. In our school, we teach them about critical literacy. We teach them about how to interrogate things. We read a text when they're in year 9, which is 14 years old, by Patrick Ness, which has a homosexual protagonist. And we critique that with news from across the world. So we give our children these skills, but still they aren't able to differentiate successfully. And still their parents are not able to differentiate successfully. So in conclusion, I think that to protect our children against fake news, because I don't think that we can combat it. I think the tech companies should be combating it, but I don't think that we can stop it. I think that we should be educating our families that we work with and not just our children. Thank you very much.
That was great stuff, wasn't it? Right. We have Kate now.
Hi. Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm not an educator. I'm going to put that right up front. I am a technology journalist. I've been writing about the internet and technology since 1995. So I've really grown professionally throughout the sort of like the blossom and bloom of the internet age. And it's given me some unique perspectives. The title of today's session is How Students and Educators Can Combat Fake News. Now, you're all here presumably because that title grabbed your attention, it interested you. And what I would like to do today is slightly different from perhaps the other panelists, is I would like to ask you to think critically about the subject that we're talking about. What is fake news? You know, perhaps Rebecca said very rightly that people find it hard to differentiate between fake news and real news, and I believe it's because the term is redundant. Fake news actually didn't appear in popular lexicon until the mid-2016s. It was traced back by BuzzFeed, actually, which is basically a joke website, a meme website, coined the phrase because they noticed a load of websites in mid-2016 coming out of Macedonia that were all spouting outrageous headlines about the US presidential election. Things like Pope Benedict supports Donald Trump, and FBI people have been arrested who were trying to look into Hillary Clinton's email scandals. And they discovered that there was a group of teenagers in Macedonia who had found a way to exploit the Facebook algorithms to earn an awful lot of money from clicks. So they created these websites with the specific intent of earning money by delivering outrageous, eye-catching headlines. In the past 18 months, the rise and rise of fake news as a title, and literally if you go onto Google Trends and look up fake news, it didn't exist before the middle of 2016. And now it's huge, like 8 million mentions every month. I think there was 2 million mentions in the first few weeks of January 2018. These stories now, the headline fake news is attached to stories that are, they're full of intrigue and drama and gossip. And unfortunately, I believe it's indicative of our nature to want to parcel loads of different concepts up into one media-friendly headline that we can all understand. Now, that serves two purposes for us as society. It allows us to lump a whole load of things together so that we can say, yeah, we're dealing with this problem. But it also allows us, when we're looking at the problem, to only talk about the things we're comfortable talking about. So what is fake news? Propaganda. Political, democratic process, if you want votes, that could be considered fake news. Clickbait, as in the kids in Macedonia who wanted to create ad revenue by getting people to click on their banners. It's opinion, perhaps poorly formed, poorly researched opinion that can be read as fact on the internet. It's rumour. Everybody likes gossip. It's now being applied to things like hate speech to incite violence against another culture or race or religion. It's also being used to lambast people who've made mistakes, perhaps genuine mistakes, but they're called fake news. And it's being used by people like Donald Trump to say, I don't want to engage with that. I don't want to have to answer that claim. I don't believe it. It criticizes me. Therefore, I'm going to call it fake news. And that's it. Done deal. I don't have to deal with it. So I think we really are doing ourselves a disservice by calling fake news what it is. Let's break it down into its elements. Should somebody writing a blatant lie in order to incite violence against another group of people, should that be lumped together with somebody who is perhaps repeating a poorly researched rumor in order to get more likes and look more popular on Facebook? If we're teaching our children how to recognize, identify, and combat misinformation and disinformation, lumping those two things together under one banner, I think, is one of the reasons that they find it difficult to identify still fake news and non-fake news. It's too big a subject. For me as a researcher, as a journalist, I think one of the big skills that people need is we need to tell them how to provide them with tools to research things, to look deeper, to think critically, but also provide them with the methodologies to use those tools successfully, because all research tools are not created equal, and if you don't know how to poll a specific tool in a specific way, then you're not going to be able to use it successfully. But I think in the long term, it's about instilling a sense of curiosity and independent thought into young people. And in the short term, I think the biggest thing we can do is stop dumbing down the spread of disinformation and misinformation by labeling it fake news. It's too easy to get out of jail free with the card fake news. We're humans, right? We're complex, strange, curious individuals. We're a multifaceted species. We have many different emotions, motivations, qualities, and flaws. We don't all need to have the same opinion, and it's healthy to learn something new and perhaps change our opinion from researching and reading stuff that is different to our way of thinking, which is why the echo chambers of filtering on social media are also incredibly damaging and should also be taken into this consideration. So let's make this, learning that we are different people, that we have different thoughts and ideas, and that not everybody's ideas are right or wrong. Perhaps there's grey areas in between. I think that should be the cornerstone of teaching young people about critical thinking. And I think perhaps if we do, then we'll start to see a more tolerant, accepting, thoughtful, and informed society evolve.
Thank you very much. Thanks. So we have fake news is fake news, really, is the headline there.
In its own right, it's fake news.
Now we have Sree.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. As you can see, we're suffering from fake news ourselves. Look at the list of speakers, and I'm not on there, and I think some of the people are also incorrect. And so that kind of tells you that you can't trust anything you see, even from the organization that is putting on the conference. And we should all be better at looking at and using something I learned a very long time ago, this phrase we use in America, I don't know if you use it in England, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Right? If your mother says have you heard that? No. So if your mother says she loves you, if your teacher says she loves you, check it out. And I used to always joke around about it, but I have twins who are almost 15, and I now experience it. When I say I love them, I wonder, am I saying it because I want them to make their bed or eat something, or, you know, so there is some truth to that. I want to give a shout out to my digital mentor, the person who is responsible for my knowing anything about technology. He's actually in the room. He's sitting right here in the front. His name is Andrew Lee. Andrew, would you just stand up for a second? You guys all should meet him. He's at the conference. Yeah, applaud him. You don't even know why you're applauding him. He's got a very nice shirt, but the reason you're applauding him and you want to get to know him in this conference is because Andrew not only taught me technology, he is one of the keepers of understanding what is real and what is not real in the world through one source of information. And that source is Wikipedia. And when you meet Andrew and you ask him about Wikipedia, he can tell you some amazing things. That we always joke that Wikipedia is the easiest, most manipulatable, is that a word? Malleable of all the social networks or networks in the world. But you know the one that came out smelling the best in the 2016 campaign? Wikipedia. Because even though it is so easy to edit and get fake things on it, the way the system happens on there, in all studies, they have come out as the least full of fake news compared to the others. That doesn't mean it's perfect. In fact, far from it. But get to know and use Wikipedia better. And you have one of the world's biggest experts sitting right here. He'll be at the conference running around. But his Twitter handle is @Fuzzheado, F-U-Z-H-E-A-D-O. Follow him on social media, F-U-Z-H-E-A-D-O. And why it's important that we understand Wikipedia and this dichotomy that the easiest to manipulate was the least manipulated tells you something about the world we live in. I, as somebody who teaches social media for a living, I believe there are no experts in social media. No one understands social media. Not the people at Facebook, not the people at Instagram, not the people at Twitter, because if they understood the power and the problems of social media truly, if they understood it, there would be no fake news. There would be no Russian trolls. And there would be no President Donald J. Trump. I put the blame of what has happened to us in the last 3 years, in part, on the people who run these social networks. And I make a living off social networks. And why is it so difficult? And why is it difficult for teachers and parents to understand this? I think you've had a masterful set of ideas from our three experts here. And the reason is because social media is tantalizingly easy to use, but frustratingly hard to master. Tantalizingly easy to use, but frustratingly hard to master. And that means trouble for all of us. And what Donald Trump understands better than the people at these organizations, better than most news organizations, is that there are things that work online that you can manipulate and get a direct action taken, and that's where we are. You also heard the true origins of the word fake news. In America, there was another way in which we thought about fake news before all this, and that was a TV show called The Daily Show, and Jon Stewart was fake news. He'd always say, "I'm fake news." But fake news, in his case, was satire. And I had a TV career once upon a time, and I found that nobody was watching television, not watching news. In fact, my own wife, when I was on the 11 p.m. news, which went against Jon Stewart, she'd rather watch Jon Stewart than me, even though I was being paid to be on TV. And so it tells you that, how quickly things change and where things are in the world. And I would urge all of us to recommit to being better students of our own social media. What is working? What's not working? Why is something important? Why is it not important? And only if we do that can we do the things we heard already. Teaching the teachers, teaching our children, teaching parents how to get involved in this stuff, and taking responsibility. Everything you post online has an impact. I spend 3 to 10 minutes on everything I post online. And that's why I'm way behind on posting. If you actually look at my Twitter feed right now, I'm at Sree on Twitter, you'll see I'm still stuck in the morning. I think Priyanka Chopra is about to speak in my schedule of things. By the way, happy St. Patrick's Day. Yes. I just discovered it's St. Patrick's Day. When you're in New York, it's all the time in your face. Here, not so much. But I take that time, not because I'm so smart or anything, because my livelihood and my future depends on social. So what do I spend in those 10 minutes? Why do I take 10 minutes to post social media? 1 minute for grammar and spelling, and that still matters. 2-3 minutes for accuracy. What am I posting? Does it make any sense? Is it real? Another minute to look at my tweets or Facebook postings through the eyes of my boss. And now that I don't have one boss, I do consulting. That means I have 1,000 bosses, and so I look at those. Then I believe social media is the only thing I do today that can get me fired today, so I'm careful about that. But also social media is the only thing I do today that can get me divorced today. So I read every one of my posts through the eyes of my wife, at Rupa Online, just to make sure she doesn't divorce me based on what I post. And then finally, I look at it to just see, is this adding to the conversation and helping people, or is it part of the fake news, which everything else is? So with that, I will stop here. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. Before we do some questions up here, because you've been sitting very patiently out there, should we just get some quick reactions and thoughts from yourselves? Because it is such a sort of lively area, and there's so many things that come to mind. Any quick reactions or thoughts from our audience? Or anything you want to put? There's a man over there.
Yes, I believe in Russell. I'm from the States, and when Trump says fake news, it's really a political thing. It's not fake news. He's just wanting to downplay the people that are criticizing him and walk away from that. So it really is a separate issue, I guess.
Yeah.
And I do also like the fact, adults get as caught up in fake news as kids do. Adults luckily have maturity and experience, or are able to discern a little better what is and what isn't. But really, it is very difficult. And as an educator, which I'm not, but most of the people here are, how do you really discern between the fake and the non-fake when kids are using social media?
Okay, let's pick up those 2 points that are from that. First of all, even though we're given this label fake news, is it a form of political lying, really, is what you're saying, isn't it? If someone doesn't like the evidence in front of them, you say, rather than confronting the evidence, you say, that's fake news. And you no longer have a discussion about the evidence. You just simply shout at each other.
Yeah.
Is that Maybe is that what we're saying? What fake news is different from?
It's a very media-friendly, attention-grabbing headline as well. And the one thing that we need to remember, where the original term fake news became popularised in mid-2016, it was because people wanted to earn money from people clicking on links. And unfortunately for the media in today's landscape, you know, the BBC, we're lucky that we have licence fee funding for certainly our operations within the UK, but the BBC has a global arm as well, and that is advertising funded. But for the most part, the media is ad funded. And the only way to earn money from advertising in the digital world is to get people to click on your banners. So in many ways, we are responsible for the perpetuation in the proliferation of headlines that say fake news this, fake news that. You know, in the last year, I can't tell you how many conferences I've been at that have had a stream which says something about fake news. And it drives me absolutely spitting mad, because it doesn't achieve anything. It allows us to lump these things all together. And I love the fact that we've got some brilliant teachers here represented and educators represented who are very forward-thinking. I've had lots of conversations. But in my experience, not as an educator professionally, but in my experience, the vast majority of children in the UK are not being taught critical thinking early enough. They are given full access to social media, sites like Facebook, from the age of 13, and often they're on it younger. And we need to be teaching them these critical thinking skills at that age so that they can begin to recognise not just fake stories, not just lies and misinformation, but also that they're living in an echo chamber of filtered content that Facebook is, you know, Facebook and Twitter and the likes, they've so called trying to float content to the surface that is of more interest to us. But what it does is it doesn't give us the serendipity of discovery of other people's thoughts and other people's opinions and the opportunity to change our thoughts and opinions. And I'm sorry, but that's how people like Donald Trump get elected, and that's how Brexit happens.
Okay. Well, should we bring our two teachers in and take up those points? How, if you start with Marjorie, how do you teach young people to understand something might not be what it appears? How do you go about it? And is it a battle you can win?
Well, as I said before, it's those tools that you don't take anything at face value. You analyse, is it a primary source, secondary source, has it been cross-referenced? The basic tools. But it's easy if you're dealing with literate students. And in South Africa, 78% of students are not literate. So last year's Pearl survey showed that 78% of pupils do not understand what they're reading, which means they cannot cross-reference. They can't go and check the purpose and origin of this person against that person. Possibly they'd go to fact-check and see, but so it depends on the context in which you work. So I work in literacy as well as teach history at a school that's well-resourced. And the well-resourced school, I really do believe that my kids really do interrogate the news, interrogate information, and are savvy. But for the majority of people in our country, they don't have those tools of interrogation.
And do you think, we've heard mentions of some politicians whose names have come up again and again in this, but it has been associated with populism and people with very strong and sometimes extreme views. In your experience in South Africa, is that seen as being politically of concern, that if it seems to inflame arguments, if you give someone a very simple, blunt message that plays on their prejudices that isn't true, is it seen as being a...
Well, this morning Simon Sharma said that, you know, with populism, there's this like knocking of education. And definitely in our society, we've just had a change of president, and the previous president, when he was criticised by people of his own race, made disparaging remarks about clever blacks. So his rise to as a leader was on the backs of inherently uneducated, illiterate people who were not able to interrogate the news. Yeah.
Rebecca, what do you think? I mean, your story was great about the kids creating their own hoax news, as it were, rather than fake news.
Yeah.
But what do you think? Is it possible? Can you equip young people to understand how serious this is and make sure that they understand what's going on?
I think that teaching critical literacy is relatively simple. I think you can teach children to interrogate things that are put in front of them. I think we've been doing that forever. That's what education is. It's teaching children how to question and how to look at different sources of information and how to pull them together and ultimately form their own opinions. I think the challenge we have, and the gentleman in the audience said that adults are more able to discern what is real or not than children. And in the community in which I work, that is not the case. The adults in my community, the parents of the children, are not able to discern what is real and what is fake because they haven't experienced that education. And so the problem that we have is that we're educating children, but we're doing it in a bit of a vacuum. And the children are hearing in schools, if they go to schools that teach this well, and I don't think all schools do, one thing, and then going home and their parent is saying, oh, look, this has happened, and showing them Facebook. And that's the challenge that we need to find a way through, because they are constantly being presented with different voices. And frankly, school is one voice amongst the millions of voices that they're being faced with on the internet, and therefore loses its power. And I have conversations all the time with children where I say, I am right about this. It is not okay to post X, Y, and Z on the internet. And they say, but everyone's doing it. And they're right, everyone is doing it, but that doesn't make it okay. But mine is one voice amongst all the other voices they're hearing. So yes, it is easy to teach children about this, but the access that they're getting to the internet from such a young age is terrifying. I've got a 2.5-year-old, and he's never been on the internet. He's never picked up something that would give him access to the internet because I'm terrified of what will happen. And at some point, he's going to need to have access to the internet. But I have seen so many times the dangers of that, that it would be in a very controlled way for my own child. But and you know, we're in loco parentis when they're in school, and the children in my school are not allowed any mobile phones in school. They're not allowed to be seen or heard. So we have some control. But the minute they walk outside, they turn their mobile phone on. And that's the challenge. And the parents, and I think the story I told about the young man is indicative. I have that conversation a lot. Like, I don't want my child to be the one that's left out. I don't want my child to be the one that feels sad because all of their friends have a mobile phone. My child tells me they're doing their homework on their phone. Well, they're not doing their homework on their phone. Of course they're not. But the parent is knows that can't be true, I think, on some level, but buys it for an easier ride because they don't know the argument to counteract that with the children often, or they don't have the words to explain to the child why it's such a bad idea. And I think we as educators need to equip parents and adults in society to have the words to communicate that more clearly. And I think like breaking down fake news into its component parts is a start on that journey, but giving all of us a language which is clear and unequivocal about the dangers and challenges of this for young people would be great.
Can I ask Sree something as well, as someone who's immersed in social media? I wonder how much this is actually to do with the nature of social media and how it's consumed. There was an interesting survey recently showing how in the UK that for the first time more television viewing was done on people's phones, or children were consuming media on their own. What would have been watching television with a family where it was mediated by the opinions of adults, and people might comment on something and they might argue about something, had gone. People took in information, whether it was in the form of video or social media, entirely alone, which I think is very different. And also the nature of, I was going to ask you, the nature of social media, it deals in very simple images and slogans effectively. You know, Twitter has got a bit longer, but it's still, there's no room for a big argument of both sides. It's not about, balance doesn't work in social media. It's strong messages, and it is the most, in simple terms, how we think of old-fashioned propaganda, shouting one slogan. Is it the nature of social media to fuel fake news?
Well, it's, I think, a way in which fake news has survived and thrived is because of social. It wouldn't have if it weren't. But then I blame the systems and how they've been built. And you have to understand that it was never meant to be what it was, what it's all grown up into becoming, right? So if you know the history of Twitter, it was failed on multiple other services that the founders then started doing. And the reason it was 140 characters is because the length of a SMS message is 160 characters and 20 characters for your name. And they just happen to fall into it. Or you look at Facebook and you know the story of Facebook and how it was founded in part by young men in a dorm room who were trying to find out who were the hottest girls on campus. You know, they didn't set out to become a 2 billion 2 billion user company. That's not how they started. And all of these are like that. And so to think that it's these companies that are responsible is true in some part. But again, we also heard, I think, a very important point about parents. In all the work I do with schools, parents will often say that I don't want my children left behind. And I suffered from this, not from the technology side, but on the language side. I regret that I didn't do enough to force my children to learn one other language as their primary language instead of English. And you see this all the time where the really smart parents teach their children their mother tongue, and the English they'll catch up. You don't have to worry. And I saw that in front of me, and I didn't do it because I wanted the English, and I will always regret that for the rest of my life, that I didn't do that more. But in technology, what we were able to do is I modeled myself after some of the people who are responsible for this world. You may know that Bill Gates' children, when they were younger, were not allowed more than 30 minutes of screen time in a day. That means phone, computer, laptop, tablet. Steve Jobs' children were not allowed any technology for many years. And they understood it. The ones who have seen the evil up close are the ones who understand that. And in our home, the only thing that we were able to do to kind of stave off everything was to say no technology at the dining table. And in America, there's a thing, not being in the UK, there's a hashtag device-free dinner. And let's actually, is this something in England?
No.
Maybe you can take it with you, hashtag device-free dinner, where you get around together and you don't have a phone. And you may have also heard of this that started in not in Silicon Valley, Wall Street bankers. They take all their phones at dinner and put it in, like poker chips in the middle of the table. And whoever touches their phone first pays for dinner. And and you try this with your friends, it really works because then nobody wants to touch it. Unless, if you're really clever.
All that waiting.
Yeah, exactly. Now on Wall Street, it doesn't matter because one phone tip might result in millions of dollars, so that's okay. But do this with your friends, and then how you win is your phone happens to be dead, and you put it in there, and you have no anxiety. Order the most expensive wines, and you'll be okay because you don't have the phone.
But just to interrupt briefly, is there a bone? We talk about the responsibility on schools, on teachers, on parents, but also isn't there a responsibility on those companies, but to control what they produce in the sense that if you were an old-fashioned newspaper, you can't just turn stuff out. You know, you'd be. But
they do. They do. I mean,
are they regulated in a way?
I mean, your country's newspapers are different from mine, at least in theory. Yours celebrate their partisanship, and each paper has its point of view and goes after it in a way that I encourage. I think it's great. In America, we have this, you have to show both sides, and in the process, you're kind of mealy-mouthed in the middle. And that's why I think in America the rise of the fact that they think climate change is not real is because of American journalists and American social media, where any story you write about climate change, you have to have two experts from the other side. But there are things we accept. When we say the sun rises in the East, we accept that. Why can't we accept when 97.5% of all scientists say that climate change is real, but it's the press that does this. So I would be careful about blaming it all on the companies, but the companies have a responsibility, and as I said up there...
One of the point I was making was if they were treated as publishers rather than as just platforms, it would change the entire game. But
Right.
do you want to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to your original question to Sree was, is the format of social media, is that kind of indicative to, promoting the spread of disinformation and misinformation? I refuse to use the term fake news, sorry. And I would say actually quite the opposite. The reason that Wikipedia is the least manipulated information source is because it is peer-reviewed. It is controlled and reviewed and regulated by the people who use it. And we have an inherent need to keep things like that clean. And whilst social media, unfortunately, because people are using social media in a very flippant way, they're not spending 10 minutes to look at a story and see whether or not it's true before retweeting it. They're using it in a casual way. But if we can teach young people to use things like Twitter, Facebook, it gives them access to a global conversation with people from every different kind of background, culture, region, geography, and get a really thorough and full picture of the way humanity thinks on a subject. And for that, the one thing that those social media companies are responsible for is filtering. And we need to stop them from filtering content, because as soon as they start putting us in echo chambers full of people who think the same way as us, then that whole benefit of true peer review of an opinion or popular stance, that disappears. So for me, that's what I think they're responsible for. And the rest of it is down to us. The rest of it is down to us to take responsibility for ourselves and say, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to poll a greater opinion than the opinion that I've got just from this one single feed. So, and actually, Rebecca, it's interesting you said that the parents came to you to ask whether or not they should have their phone back. Do you think that maybe our parents are actually so befuddled by technology that they're divorcing themselves from the responsibility and passing it on to the teaching profession? I think that's crazy.
Okay, great. And let's get some more thoughts from our audience. There's a woman at the back who's got a hand up there. Do a microphone for her. And could you say who you are, if you want to, and where you're from? And
I'm Maria from Greece, and I was basically wanted to ask you something, but you partly answered it. Whether things are better with social media, and perhaps they don't feed fake news, and the fact that we have a term for it actually makes it better. In the past, people will say it happened because it was on TV. Now we have a term, so we identify possibility of fake news. And second, people can search. They can check, recheck, Google, go on social media. So I think critical thinking, in fact, is promoted through social media instead of suppressed.
That's a very good point. And before we ask the panel, any other questions you want to nip in? Is anyone else? But the hands hovering. There's a woman there at the back there with fair hair, right at the back. She's waving at you, just behind you. There we are, look. Just behind the camera.
Good afternoon. I'm from the US, and as an adult I try to use different news media to get informed. I try to see Al Jazeera, I try to watch BBC, NPR, I try to be informed as an adult. Imagine what a child at the age of 5 is confronted with. And so my question to you is, at some point, would you agree or disagree that fake news in the US can be compared to censorship in some way, or manipulation? Because I think this is really what it boils down to, that we all have a responsibility. And yes, educators and parents, we all need to work together. But I think the government has a responsibility there too. And particularly one government that asks, or that proclaims to be a democracy, and that promotes freedom of speech. And we're really confronted with that question of critical thinking and questioning the authors.
That's great. Okay, let's take those two questions together, because they actually complement each other quite nicely. And we'll come back to the woman here. But so we're offered there at one point saying, in fact, by saying we know about fake news, we're actually halfway to winning the battle. At least we know, we've established that we have to be aware of all this fakery out there. The other point saying, really, in fact, fake news is an attack on freedom of speech. It's a form of censorship, almost by default. Do you want to say something, Marjorie? What do you think of those 2 points?
I want to talk about those 2 points and also respond to something Rebecca said about not allowing cell phones at school, because I think that it is good to identify something, and for me, whether we call it fake news or not fake news, or propaganda or biased reporting, it's identifying that bias, identifying that prejudice, identifying the propaganda, and you identify it with very similar means. So it's the skills, as you say, that you were talking about identifying the author, identifying the purpose. But our approach is not to take away the cell phone at school, because in South Africa, very few schools have access to computers, but the youth have access to smartphones. And that has become an educational tool and a means of being able to search the internet. So it can be an opportunity or a threat, depending on how you handle it. And in our country, it's a wonderful tool. We just need to give the tools of circumspection and interrogation, and as I say, it depends on the resources at children's disposal and also their literacy or lack thereof.
Rebecca, what do you think? To both those 2 points together.
Yeah, those 2 points. Also, interestingly, sorry, I poked you with my pen. We allow our sixth formers to have their mobile phones because we recognise that they're going to have to go into a world where they have to manage themselves in this arena. So those 2 points. So is the world better with social media?
Was it better with fake news?
Is it better with fake news?
No, we know about fake news.
Now that we know about it. Well, I think that to answer that question would be to ignore Kate's point that term is too broad. I think that there are some things that are labelled as fake news that are completely harmless. And I think there are some things that are incredibly harmful, and the world is not a better place with those things. And so I just think it's a spectrum, and in order to answer that question, you would need to break it down into its component parts. I think in general, it would be better if there was no news that was not based entirely on fact that we consumed. The second point was, is fake news a form of censorship or manipulation? If I was being really cynical, I would say that all news is, on some level, a form of manipulation. I think that the problem with anyone being able to write things on the internet is that sometimes those people are ill-informed when they write things, and that's the problem. Whereas if you're a media broadcaster, there is a certain degree of fact-checking that has to happen in order for you to remain able to keep broadcasting. And so I think it's just about who is creating news. But I think news is on a massive spectrum.
What do you think, Kate, about that point about freedom? Because it's very central to this whole debate, really, isn't it, about the idea that is it something that which actually, in its nature, blocks proper exchange and free speech and in a sense, pushes people to extremes, because that's the nature of the beast, as you said. It's sensationalising, attention-seeking.
Exactly. Yasu Maria. For me, one of the biggest problems, I know I sort of spouted off about, fake news. I hate the term fake news, and I think, I think it's damaging to our intent to try and educate people about how to recognise different things on the internet if we lump it all together under one kind of dumbed-down banner of fake news. But probably one of the most damaging things about having this headline fake news is that politicians, famous people who are criticised, if they read something, it has stopped the need for them to have a reasoned discourse and debate about the things that they're being accused of. It's too easy to hide behind this banner of fake news and not have to deal with it and make it into a joke. And I think that a lot of political figures are getting away with blue murder at the moment, because they just feel like they don't have to answer to it. And their social media cronies who are all in their own little echo chamber are all on board with this, and they just hide behind this big wall that says fake news and say, I don't have to answer to that anymore. And that's one of the best things about social media. Not only the fact that it gives you the opportunity to have a peer review conversation with people who you would never normally meet, but also it allows us to hold people in positions of authority accountable for their actions. People can't, until this fake news banner, I would have said, if you do something wrong and you're in the public eye, you can't hide anymore. There is nowhere to hide because you're going to be accounted. As a journalist myself, I really value the contact that people have with me on Twitter, because it makes me work harder. I know that I can't write a story that is badly researched and publish it as fact, because I am going to get attacked and criticised by the people who follow me on social media, and I value that. I wouldn't want to hide from that, because it makes me call to account myself, because I know that I'm going to get called to account by my followers and my audience. So I think social media is an incredibly valuable thing. I think we need to protect it, by not applying filters to it, by not allowing people like Facebook and Twitter to regulate the content that we are delivered through its channels. I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do. And we need to rip down this wall that bad people hide behind of fake news, so that they can once more be held accountable for their actions by the great vast public that is receiving that information through social media.
Great. Sree, what do you think? Is it a fancy way of saying we're going to stop listening to proper news and free speech?
No, I think that we have an opportunity now, all of us, to change the way we take content and what we do with it. And one of the easiest ways in which we contribute to the problem is how we share content, right? Somebody posts something and we hit retweet without thinking about it. I do it all the time sometimes. And one of my favorite things is how many quotes there are by Abraham Lincoln and by Einstein and Gandhi that are fake on the internet. And there was this beautiful graphic of a face of Einstein saying, I didn't say half the shit people say I said on the internet. And of course he didn't say that, but people then shared that, right? So even when you even when you're clearly, wrong, or when it's wrong, people still blindly share it. And we have a role to play in this, and that is maybe tuning down the people who waste our time online. And can we share better content? And that's something, especially on Facebook, where there's so much potential to do good. They're ending up doing so many problematic things because, as we've said so many times, the platforms need to help. And I think that the other thing that we can all do better is find better voices among the people we're listening to. And as you heard Kate say very well, that the echo chamber that's being built by the systems, by the algorithm, is part of the problem. But there's also something we can do, and that is listen to different voices ourselves. We create our own filter bubbles, and then the companies make it worse. So while you're here this week, your goal should be to add more followees. Everyone asks me, how do I get more followers? But no one ever asks me, how do I get more followees? And that you control. Change. If Twitter is boring, you're following boring people, right? Abraham Lincoln said that. And so we must really believe that there are better people that we should be following and participating with.
Very well put. And there's a woman here who, sorry, can you microphone down here, please? We didn't get a chance to hear a question before.
And I'd love to have Andrew say something, listening to all this as an expert on this stuff.
Hello, I'm a teacher, and I'm not such a digital person, really, but obviously I'm interested in the issue. And my feeling is that critical thinking is not enough to face this issue. And the way the panel is composed, I think, is telling us what we have to do. Because in a way, it's traditional teaching, school teachers, and people from the media. Because my feeling is that when this kind of not real news, or this kind of pervasive news catches you every day, every minute, and so fast, you have to learn how it works. So if we could teach students both the way how to trace the sources, the news, but how it works and why it works. I appreciated Ms. Russell's idea that it's also about money. It's not only propaganda. So we have to learn that, and students have to know that. And so the idea, I think your idea of having a methodology would help a lot, because we teachers are trained in the critical thinking way, but it's not enough. So we need something more. That's my opinion.
Very good point.
Where are you from?
Italy.
Italy. I'm happy to come to Italy and speak at your
Especially in the summer, maybe.
Yeah.
But it also it makes me think. There was a report put out very recently by MIT in Boston, who are looking at how fake news spread much more quickly and further than authentic news. Partly because Kate was suggesting it's more interesting. If you make something up with that and you are unfettered by reality, you can make something very exciting that everyone wants to read, and that will keep being shared and keep going out and out. Like Sree's fake Einstein quotes, and months later, if you say, well, in fact, it wasn't quite true. That's whereas the truth is a dull old thing that you have to wheel out and exchange. And I think there's a sort of almost like a strange sort of media Darwinism going on with some of these things, and that we're quite slow to catch up with how it happens.
Maybe we need to actually, as well as teaching young people critical thinking, to recognise and research stories and independent thinking, we need to teach them perhaps how not to become purveyors of fake news in and of its own right.
Yeah.
And there's some good people who are doing that. There are various projects in America. There's something called the News Literacy Project, which does amazing work to teach every college student in America, that's the eventual goal, but starting at few universities, how to understand what's fake and what's not, what's real and what's not. And so if you can look up the NLP, the News Literacy Project.
And there's a woman here as well, and if you have thoughts to be had, this is your chance to share free speech and to have some. Andrew, you going to say something?
Yeah, I'll say something and then I'll hand it over to you real quick. Just real quickly.
So do you want to say who you are? We sort of had a semi-introduction from
some other folks.
Sree
So my name
before.
is Andrew Lee. I was a journalism professor for many years. I've written a book about Wikipedia, and I was actually the first person to use Wikipedia in the classroom in 2003 when I was teaching in university. So CNN did the very first TV story about Wikipedia ever in 2003. It was about my class in college using Wikipedia as kind of a news literacy project. And I think the gentleman who asked about the question is fake news a form of censorship? That's actually a really good analogy. I don't know if anyone here has ever seen the movie Apollo 13. Has anyone seen that or knows about it? You know that the real fascinating part about that movie was not that the astronauts were going to run out of oxygen. It was that there was too much carbon dioxide being built up and you couldn't get rid of the carbon dioxide. So they're going to be poisoned by the carbon dioxide, not that they're going to run out of oxygen. And that's a perfect analogy for fake news, right? That the fake news polluting your media environment effectively means you're going to die because you don't know how to make the difference between the good stuff and the bad stuff, right? So effectively it is killing your ability to get information because you can't make heads or tails out of what's what. So one of the things I do in the US is we've done several sessions now in the United States with the Newseum, which is a museum just about news, and with the American Association of School Librarians, and we've gone around several times with a new poster that we've created about news literacy for school librarians and teachers, and maybe we make it a goal that next year we could have a session here where we get your feedback on this poster. We've talked to over 100 school librarians. We'd love to talk to more educators around the world. So we have a one poster project, which is best practices for news literacy and Wikipedia literacy. And it's one poster for advice on how to sift fact from fiction when you're looking at content on the web, in Wikipedia, in news sources. And we've been doing this kind of training for over a decade in certain circles, but we never really worked with educators and school teachers. And so we'd love to do more with you folks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. So.
And can we share the microphone with our colleague there?
Oh, by the way, this year's Wikipedia conference is in South Africa in Cape Town. So we'd love to stop by and see what you're doing down there.
No advertising.
Hi, my name is Uneza Nizami. I'm from Pakistan, but I live here in the UAE. For me, the Wikipedia thing, where it's the least tampered with source of information, that says to me that there are a lot of people out there who, when they see that some information is wrong, they go and fix it. They're not okay with it. So for me, that would be something to tap into. So like, if instead of saying how do we combat fake news, how do we inculcate this sort of like an abhorrence for lies in students, where they cannot, where they're not okay with something being fake, and they don't share it to be share it for the glamour of it or the excitement of it. For me, that's what it is. Because, for example, if I see fake news, it just turns me off, and I don't share it, and it stops there for whoever's on my list. So, for students, wouldn't it be a matter of don't be okay with lies, to teach them as values, to sort of combat the issue of fake or whatever kind of news it is?
So the truth is the key of that, the heart
Yeah,
of doing what's true.
It's sort of like a values thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, very much, isn't it? Yeah.
Peer review, I think, is the blockchain. We know what blockchain is, right? Peer review is the blockchain of human conversation and experience. If you put something out into the public and enough people... I may be the only person here who's banned from editing Wikipedia, by the way, because I tried to change my date of birth on my page. Yeah.
You shouldn't have the real one on there.
I know. But yeah, I think peer review, and that's right. I'm sure if you actually looked at the edits that people, the false edits people make on Wikipedia, it's very high. But you have an army of people who care passionately about making sure that it is truth, who will change it back, report you, and get you banned from editing.
But in the nature of Wikipedia, it's quite a complex thing, and you've got to be quite thoughtful and well up on something to get in there. So that's the thing. Any last? We've got a couple of seconds left. Any feel like it'd be nice to get as many people speaking as possible since we're talking about free speech. Any last contributions before the seconds tick away? There's one there.
Alison Peacock from the UK. I just
hello.
I wonder whether we should just have a fake rate. You know, some sort of something on social media that kind of grades how much we think something is plausible.
Like a kind of TripAdvisor for fakeness.
Yeah, fake.
Right.
Good idea.
That's a great idea.
And then who decide though? That's the thing, isn't it? You think, well, you know, that's you go down that road.
And maybe some professional certification for news, for proper news organisations that are, committed to delivering research news, actually have a certificate of authentication for those sites.
One thing that we need in India is something like Snopes. Are you familiar with Snopes? SNOPES, which looks at things that are fake and outlines anything lore on the internet. And my mother, among many people on WhatsApp, every morning shares lots of fake health news, like this will prevent cancer, etc. So I'm looking for if anyone knows somebody who does this so that I can send her to this link and then she can fix it. Now, the problem is that they become smarter. What they'll do is on WhatsApp, they'll say, here are 5 things that cure cancer, and here's the article. They know you won't read the article, so they'll just give you the excerpt or the summary, and the summary is fake, but the article is real. Yeah. With brilliant people.
Well, we've run out of time, and can I actually say that I think all these contributions have been really, really, really good from our panellists and from yourselves, actually. It's a very, very thoughtful exchange. And can I ask you to clap the speakers? And thank you all very much for coming. It's very, very good. And we'll see what happens tomorrow.